How do you find the best tactic in Football Manager? Well, there's a lot of ideas, but one of them is you could host a giant, bombastic, over-the-top World Cup, the first ever for Football Manager, and then crown a champion from a bunch of different nations that held really large qualifying processes to find the best player to represent them. And then that champion's one tactic would be the best one. Right? The nation that won the first Football Manager World Cup was Indonesia, and their manager is a guy named Ichsan, and he uploaded all three of the tactics that he used for the tournament. And we have our hands on all three, including the main one that he used the most, that is the holy grail of Football Manager. There it is. Look at it. Are you really that surprised? There were a few managers of this Football Manager World Cup, and I'm not joking, only a few, that used a 4-2-3-1 primarily, and this by far was the best one. And this also isn't your daddy's 4-2-3-1. There are a lot of sneaky player instructions in this that some of them even caught me by surprise, and I'm somebody that just looks at this sort of stuff all day. If you didn't follow the tournament itself, Indonesia had to start with Sporting. And in 3 seasons with Sporting, they basically won every single possible trophy they could win. I think they dropped the League Cup somewhere in Season 2 or Season 3, but I'm talking Europa League, Champions League, won consecutively. The only reason they didn't win a Champions League twice in those 3 seasons is they lost the final on penalties in a match that they dominated on XG. But what makes this tactic so special? How can you use it? What lessons can we all learn from it to build our own tactics? Well, I asked the man himself. We will be receiving knowledge from the mighty Ichsan. And while Ichsan speaks English, he used a translator at the Football Manager World Cup, and he was asking if he could use a translator on the video. So I told him I would just send him written questions, and then he could send those written questions back with written answers so he'd have more time to, think of the words in a language that isn't his native tongue. Those answers are what we call the Holy Football Manager Book of Ichsan. My first question, why the DM on support? I'm somebody that's very nervous leaving that much creative freedom up to the players themselves. I like to have one defensive midfielder that's deeper and one defensive midfielder that is perhaps a little more aggressive, but Ichsan obviously likes to go with 2 DMs on support. The answer? I choose double DM support with different ideas, basically. He says one is typically a ball passer and one is a typical destroyer. So you can do overload attack without having to fear for the counterattack because DM support will maintain your defense depth and will help attack if needed. Basically, there is no tactical prerogative for these players to get forward. But if you naturally have one of these players that's more of a playmaker and more of an offensive player, they're going to find themselves more involved in those roles. So instead of using the tactic to determine what these defensive midfielders on support are going to do, he actually uses the player types. All the tutorials I've ever made, I've never said that, and it's genius. And it just goes to show, if you want to get the most out of a tactic, signing the right players is always the way to go. You need the right types of players. You don't need them. It's good to have. The second question I had, ball-playing defenders, both of them on defend. I have long been hesitant as my own personal scar tissue of playing both at ball-playing defender because they take a lot of risks and they turn the ball over more, and I've been punished too many times by those turnovers leading to goals against me. The answer, quite simply, is ball-playing defender with dribble more. Wow. I like it. And that's right. Both of these ball-playing defenders are rocking a dribble more and a tackle harder. Don't worry, we're going to come back to that tackle harder instruction because it's on literally every player on the field. He said he can create gaps when all of your front players are marked and guarded by opponents. He can create chances like Sula did in the World Cup final. Now, I don't remember that specific instance from the Football Manager World Cup final, but clearly when the rest of your team is well marked, a ball-playing defender with dribble more is going to pick that ball up and force somebody to defend them, creating an opening. But it only works if both center backs are ball-playing defenders, obviously. The third question, tackle harder on every single player. And I asked basically, have card issues ever been a concern? Have you ever let it go, like taken off tackle harder? And he basically said, no, I use this in conjunction with get stuck in. Use tackle harder or not, your player will still get a card, so I prefer to use it to increase my chance of getting the ball. My players are going to pick up cards anyways, and clearly it ends up paying off a lot more than it hurts if his entire team is on tackle harder with get stuck in on as well. His players are sending it to try and get the ball, and when they win it, they can flip the play. Now, my next question had to do with the fullbacks. These are both fullbacks on attack, which is fascinating by itself, but fullback on attack has been in vogue with a lot of the popular tactics on FM24. Then you look at the player instructions and it gets pretty crazy. Take more risks, cross from byline, cut inside with the ball, which is one you don't necessarily expect to see, stay wider, and tackle harder. These two you would expect to be almost contradictory, but what it means essentially is the player is going to stay wider at the start, and once they have the ball, they will eventually look to cut in and drop it off. This is the sort of forcing defenders to pass one ball carrier off that can mess with the defense. It works really well in Football Manager. My question specifically was about why have cross from the byline on. And Ichsan said, because I have an advanced forward who may be ahead of the opposing defender. So crosses from the touchline will minimize offside because the ball reaches the front first and increases your striker's chance to score. Bro, that's so freaking smart, dude. If the fullback is able to get all the way to the byline to cross the ball, you're not going to have anybody getting offside. And advanced forwards are prone to offside the way they're pushing the back line. I also asked about the cut inside. You knew I was going to ask about the cut inside on a fullback on attack. Ichsan said, this will help me in terms of overload attacks, especially in the opponent's penalty box. The stay wider instruction will keep him outside. When he gets the ball, he will try to go inside. So I'm glad I at least wasn't surprised by all of the things he said. That doesn't mean it's still not completely and utterly genius and something that I definitely don't do in my tactics. Yet. But there was something else that was curious, that jumped out at me the moment I looked at this tactic. And that was that for some reason I plugged it in with the team at Wolves. The reason I've done that is because Wolves, according to our testing, is the worst team in the Premier League with a data update on Football Manager. And so at the end of this video, we're going to sim a whole season with Wolves where this is the only tactic that they can play, obviously. The other thing that jumped out to me right when I saw this tactic is that both inside forwards or on support. I usually, or almost always, have at least one winger that is on attack, no matter what their role is. Having both of them on support was fascinating to me. Ichsan's response, his job is only to support the attack, unless he gets a chance to shoot. Because in the player's instructions, I told him to guard the opponent's fullback, so he doesn't get carried away in the attack and must be disciplined with his job description. And that is true. If you go into his inside forward positions, you can see a mark-specific position instruction that is for the opponent's fullback on that particular side. This is something that I almost never incorporate in my games, specifically because of what Ichsan is talking about. When you have your wingers or any other member of your team specifically marking a position on the other team, they have to really be focused on their defensive discipline, and particularly with wingers, they're not going to stay in good attacking positions. They have to recover into them. But while you're looking at this, you might notice a couple of other weird things, like hold up ball as an instruction, and it is on both of the inside forwards in this tactic. So I asked about it, and the answer, very simple. To hold the ball up and wait for the fullback to help the attack. This will confuse the opposing player because the winger should be the one to attack, but he holds the ball up and waits for the fullback to support the attack. So if you're on a quick counter attack, the wingers are not going to be a part of that. They're going to grab the ball, they're going to wait for the fullback to get there and create the overload on the wings with those fullbacks on attack. Wingers on support with defensive responsibilities. If they do get the ball in those countering situations, they wait and chill. But the concerns I just was telling you about, that when you are marking the opposing fullback with your winger, you can't keep pressure on the opposition. You just have your advanced forward and your attacking midfielder up there. So I asked how he keeps pressure on the opposition. Marking the opponent's fullback's the winger's job description. The opponent's wing will still be guarded by our fullback, remembering we have a DM there who will maintain the depth of defense. He seems remarkably unconcerned with the type of problem that I'm raising, and the more I think about it, it's because the fullbacks are very typically the outlet for the press breaking in the first place. If your winger is specifically marking them, they have to outlet the ball through the middle where they're going to run into those two DMs on support if you have your back line up high, which in this tactic, of course, it's a good tactic. He has step up more and a high press overall, so they will be there. Another instruction on the inside forwards is to sit narrower. In the tactic that you have available to download, one is set to sit wider. I have since confirmed with him that both inside forwards are set to sit narrower. So they kind of scrunch in towards the middle where they hold the ball up to allow the fullback to start in that wide position and either go and cross from the byline or dribble their way in with the ball. Start dragging those defenders all over the place. But in my next question, I return to the fullbacks because now that we've fleshed out what the inside forwards are doing, the fullbacks with their cut inside with the ball had me really curious because I wanted to know what the attack looked like when it was fully developed, when it was all the way up to 10, when you've had the ball for a while and everybody's up the field. Which player ends up where when the attack is fully developed? Ichsan's answer? this is the answer to points 4, 5, 6, and 7. And upon further assessing the Holy Football Manager book of Ichsan, I determined that this instruction cut inside with the ball means that for the vast majority of the time, those fullbacks are wide and looking to get to the byline to cross. Only in rare instances when they're dwelling on the ball a little bit will they carry that ball inside and start dragging those defenders. But on to the instructions. And there are a couple of things that obviously will jump out to you as stuff that people with good tactics do all the time. Slightly higher tempo, slightly lower passing. You've got focusing play down the wings. You've got underlaps. We're going to get to that in a second. There's one you might have missed, and that's the play for set pieces. Normally in these types of highfalutin tactics, you don't see play for set pieces ticked. But Ichsan, a very simple reason. We have good players in that. We have good jumping reach and heading for the player who's passed, and have good crossing and corners for the slinger. One of the most devastating things from a lot of the teams in this tournament, the Football Manager World Cup, was amazing set-piece tactics. Obviously, Ichsan and Team Indonesia were no different. They had those great players, and so as much as Football Manager is a game that you're trying to manipulate, if you have good players on set pieces, playing for more set pieces is the way to go. Endorsed by the literal world champion. And back into the instructions, I'd always understood that narrow attacks had the opportunity to mess with defenses more. Wide attacks were something that you were supposed to use in specific circumstances. But a lot of great tactics for a long time have been narrow, all the way to the left. But with sitting narrower inside forwards and all the way narrow attacking width, I just wanted to ask, why narrower attacks? There is chaos in their midfield, but our fullback stays wider to be able to overlap if there is a chance and cross byline. The narrower the team gets, the harder it is to mark individual runners because they're all sandwiched next to each other, especially when the stay wider fullbacks keep dragging markers out wide. When you think about it, it creates more man-on-man situations in that narrow part of the field where you're closer to the goal, but only when it works in conjunction with that width in the fullbacks. There's also run-it defense ticked, and this is something that I don't see ticked in all of the great tactics of the world. So I asked. I mean, that's what we're doing here. We're asking the guy that won everything. Ichsan. And this seemed more like a spot call in the tournament itself, which is fascinating. That you can have this great tactic, but it's not just a plug-and-play thing once you get the right players. You are still feeling out 1 or 2 or 3 different options based off who you have. He said simply, I think our players needed to run more often. And the composure and dribbling attributes are really needed for this, obviously, but looking at the way the team's playing, he wanted his players to pick the ball up and run more. Use your brain, people. Use your eyes and your brain. Let's leave those crazy offensive instructions behind, like low crosses and underlaps and all that stuff. Let's get into the defensive instructions for the real connoisseurs. And there is one thing that jumped out to me instantly, and that is invite crosses. To which the answer was once again remarkably simple to the point that it made me feel a little bit stupid. Why invite crosses? Well, because we play a narrow shape. Our players are more concentrated in the middle, so we force them to invite crosses. Basically saying that your team's already narrow, your team's set up to play in a narrow way. We don't want to make them try and run all the way out to prevent crosses. We're going to try and defend from the inside out and invite those crosses better than allowing stuff to come down the middle. And honestly, it works wonderfully, clearly. I am sure you would not want to do this if your center backs were short, but as they've already talked about, they like to build a team that has good jumping reach and set piece attributes, hence the play for set pieces. And so having to deal with a lot of balls in the air in the box is not something the team's particularly concerned about, so that combined with the already narrow shape, you're good. It's also worth noting on the defensive side of things, the back line is not all the way up at much higher, it is just at higher. And the world didn't end. Everything didn't explode. It's obviously an aggressive pressing tactic with man marking on the fullbacks, but it's not over the top. It is allowing a little space for things to breathe here and not giving so much room to run in behind. But once we broke down the actual specifics of a lot of the tactics and instructions going on here, I wanted to ask some more broad conceptual questions about the team. The first one being, what type of player suits this tactic best? But the answer I got wasn't necessarily a direct answer to that question and more a philosophy of what type of players to look for that smashes a lot of the things I believe in. I want to be very clear. I agree with this more now than I used to. The answer, I always prioritize players who have high determination. I made a now infamous video a couple of years ago talking about how determination did not have a serious impact on player development. We did a whole breakdown of player development, and there are a lot of things that have an impact on it. Determination has a very minor impact. on development according to those tests. But over the couple of years since then, if you've watched the streams on Twitch, which if you haven't, I'd recommend it. I've been playing Crusader Kings the last couple of weeks. It's been great, but we're starting a new Football Manager save by the time this comes out because FM24 forever for life, hashtag life with a Y or something. But I've been saying that high determination players have been playing really well for me. I don't think determination has a lot to do with development. I think high determination just makes them better on the field. That is something that Ichsan is backing up here. But also, no tactic, especially at the level that the Football Manager World Cup was played at, stays static forever. Obviously, things like run at defense because he felt like his team needed to run at the defense more. Those are things that you add. So I wanted to ask, what's the first thing you change when it's not going well and you need a goal? And Ichsan provided me with a very simple 3-step process. And it has to do with the striker, who we haven't really talked about much so far. It's just an advance forward with tackle harder on. So the first step is striker, activate roam from position. So come in here and have roam from position on to try and separate from whatever marker is keeping that striker quiet. The second option is to switch to a complete forward instead of an advance forward. Again, just trying to free the strikers so that they can find some room to operate. And the third change is right here. A switch to go to a double striker, turning the tactic into a 4-2-4 to go for it late. What he doesn't want to give up is the structure of this kind of back 8 and just wants to mess with the two most primary offensive options to pursue a goal. It's worth mentioning the attacking midfielder has roam from position, move into channels, and of course tackle harder on, so that's already a very fluid position at the 10. Kind of plays as a double striker once you get enough possession anyways. Now the pairing of the double striker will be advanced forward or pressing forward combined with a complete forward so that there is some stagger in their movement. Not a fan of going with just the double advance forward. And it's clear based off those answers that the belief here is that the most important thing to being able to score more goals is being able to separate your forwards from the mark that is ruining them or the player positioning that is not allowing them to get free. But of course, there's a flip side to that question, which is what do you need to change when you want to defend more? And that was a very simple answer. Slow down the tempo and up time wasting. That's it. I usually get fancy with it and I take off counter press and stuff, but Ichsan does not go for that. Does not want to change the way this tactic is playing too much. Just wants to change the pace that the ball's being played up the field. But past that, I zoomed it out even further to the mentality of the entire team, which is on attacking in the base tactic. I usually start my tactics on positive unless we're playing a team that we believe ourselves to be way better than. Then I'll leave it on attacking. So I asked why, the thought process behind starting with attacking. And this is where you get that kind of Jose Mourinho sauce from Ichsan, who swaggered all over this tournament. By the way, showed up to the tournament and told them he'd only been playing for a year, and then after he won the tournament, he said, "Nah, that was a lie, I just wanted to mess with you guys." Ichsan has some swag, and the whole philosophy is I instruct my players to score first so that the game goes according to our wishes as a team. Score as many goals as possible. You concede 3, but you score 4, you still win the game. So go out there and attack, and we believe we're going to be able to score more goals than you're going to be able to score against us. Now, that's a pretty hard bar. That's a pretty solid mic drop. But I wanted him to give us one more nugget of knowledge for all of the people out there that aren't just going to copy this tactic, but want to take this knowledge and try and create their own that best suits their team. And that answer's coming after we see what this does with Wolves. Because I can't wait any longer. I want to see what happens. Let's sim the season, shall we? The simulation is done. Wolves, a team that in our 10 simulations of this updated 2024-2025 database finished in the relegation zone in our tests, ended up finishing 5th. By far the highest finish that we'd seen on that record, like by far using this tactic. Jakob Strand-Larsen won the Golden Boot, by the way, with 25 goals out of Erling Haaland and Ollie Watkins. So yeah, the tactic is good. We already knew that though. What does Ichsan have to say about how to make your own good tactic? One word. One word was the answer. Knowledge. Really makes you think. It's what Football Manager always comes down to. Playing and playing and playing and trying things and playing and learning and trying things and playing and then a little bit of luck here and there, and you're good to go. Now, if you want to follow Ichsan for more stuff like this, or just to actually watch him play Football Manager, he started making YouTube videos and tweeting and posting stuff on Instagram. He's starting up a Pentagon challenge soon, and if you want to keep track of all of that stuff, all of his links are right at the top of the description. I know I, for one, will be keeping an eye on what Ichsan gets up to. Thank you to Ichsan for getting back to me, and obviously congratulations to him again for winning the Football Manager World Cup. If you want to see how to actually set up up your saves so you can get to the point where you're plugging in tactics, then that video is one that you should be able to check out. And I'll see you guys on stream. Bye.